I am Madison, 23 years old, and 3 weeks ago, I stood on an Ivy League stage as the valedictorian. While thousands of strangers roared with applause, the four seats reserved for my family were hauntingly empty. My parents, Gregory and Patricia, were miles away, hosting a 120 guest gala for my younger brother Jackson's startup in Silicon Valley. I ended the night alone in a parking lot, with only $35 in my account and a sealed letter from Zurich. I did not know it then, but that letter was about to liquidate my old life forever. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now, as I would love to know who is part of our community. The asphalt beneath my tires was still warm from the afternoon sun, but inside my car, I felt like ice. I did not cry. Crying is a biological response for people who still believe there is something left to save. And I had finally reached the point of emotional liquidation. I sat in my beat up car, the heavy fabric of my graduation gown rustling against the seat, and I opened my laptop. The cursor blinked steadily on the screen, a rhythmic, clinical pulse. My fingers were steady as I accessed the server. 48 hours ago, my mother's voice had drifted through the phone like sugar-coated poison. Madison, Jackson's app is glitching again, Patricia had said, not even bothering with a greeting. We need you to go into the server and fix the logic before the gala. You can do it while they are reading the names at graduation, right? You are so good at multitasking. She did not ask about my valedictorian speech. She did not ask if I had practiced my walk across the stage. To her, my 4 years of sleepless nights and bioengineering research were just a convenient, unpaid resource for her golden boy to exploit. I had been the silent investor in their version of a family for too long, footing the bill with my own life while they overdrafted on my compassion. You are so independent, Madison, my father, Gregory, had added in the background of that same call. They used that word like a badge of honor, but it was really a tactical release of liability. They wanted me to be strong enough to survive their neglect, but compliant enough to remain their ghostwriter. Well, I was finished with being a ghost. I logged into the Unicorn app's root directory. Jackson had named it that because he believed he was a rarity. In reality, he was a parasitic investment. I knew every line of that code because I was the one who had actually built the backend, while Jackson was out networking and taking credit for his disruptive vision. I did not delete the app, as that would be a reactive, emotional move. Instead, I performed a clinical strike. I spent 20 minutes embedding a kill switch deep in the core logic. It was not designed to crash the system immediately. It was a time bomb. I set the trigger for the exact moment Jackson would hit the launch button on stage at the Silicon Valley Gala in front of 120 VIP investors. He wanted a standing ovation. I was going to give him a black screen and a total system blackout. This was not revenge, it was accounting. I was simply reclaiming the intellectual property they had spent years embezzling from my brain. Once the script was live, I closed the laptop. My account balance stared back at me. $35. A pathetic amount for a valedictorian who had just graduated at the top of her class. But it was just enough. I logged into a secret airline account I'd kept since freshman year. I used the frequent flyer miles I'd silently hoarded to book a one-way flight to Zurich. The mandatory taxes and fees came to exactly $34.50. I stared at the transaction approval. Balance, 50 cents. I was leaving the country with 2 quarters to my name. I pulled the letter from Dr. Weber out of my gown pocket. The heavy paper felt like a lethal weapon. $225,000. That was the value of the Global Research Award waiting for me at the university in Switzerland. My parents thought I was a worthless burden who would eventually crawl back home to work for Jackson for free. They were not shocked by what they had done to me. They were about to be shocked that I had stopped playing along. I looked at the massive stadium in my rearview mirror one last time, visualizing the 4 empty seats inside. The subscription to this family has officially expired. I am done being invisible. It is time to become the storm. I opened my old digital journal. a 4-year ledger of everything they had taken and everything I had built in the dark. In a family that prioritized the return on investment of every interaction, I had been classified as the low maintenance asset. While Jackson was given a brand new Mustang for his 19th birthday, I was calculating how many night shifts at the lab it would take to cover my rent. My parents did not see this as neglect. They saw it as character building. They normalized their cruelty by rebranding it as my strength. Whenever I mentioned the crushing weight of working 3 jobs while maintaining a 3.9 grade point average, my mother would just smile, that practiced, vacant smile. You have always been so independent, Madison. Not like Jackson. He needs our guidance to navigate the startup world. This was the trap of normalizing cruelty. In their minds, they were not exploiting me, they were simply allocating resources to the high potential child. I was treated as a ready-made source of labor, a backup server for Jackson's lack of talent. I realize now that I was living in a prison without bars. For 4 years, I wore invisible chains made of a survivor's loyalty, a loyalty to a family that viewed my existence as purely transactional. I was stuck in a state of learned helplessness, believing my only value was in how well I could fix Jackson's mistakes or finish his code. I remember the night I came home from a double shift, the smell of floor wax and stale coffee clinging to my skin, only to find them celebrating Jackson's new algorithm, an algorithm he had plucked directly from my discarded research papers. They toasted to his genius, while I sat in the kitchen, eating cold ramen. Anger was not loud back then. It was a slow, clinical buildup of facts. I watched as they bought Jackson's way into networking events while I tutored until midnight to afford my textbooks. Every time I provided them with compassion, they treated it like a luxury they could overdraft without limit. But the Zurich letter had changed the math. That heavy, cream-colored envelope was the key to my cell. $225,000 was not just a scholarship. It was the price of my freedom. It was the validation that my work had value outside the narrow, toxic lens of the Silicon Valley gala. I looked at my reflection in the dim light of the car dashboard. The girl who used to beg for a seat at their table was gone. In her place was someone who had already built her own. I had spent years being the silent investor in their version of success, but today I was pulling my funding. I did not feel sadness, only the absolute clarity of a balanced sheet. The debt was paid, the contract was null and void, and I was finally ready to watch their unicorn go extinct. My phone began to vibrate against the plastic center console of the car. It was Gregory. He was not calling as a father who had missed his daughter's graduation. He was calling as a frantic chief executive officer watching his top-performing asset walk off the job. I did not answer a single call. I watched the screen glow with his name until it went dark, only for it to light up again 3 seconds later. The warning glitch I had planted was doing its job perfectly. Jackson's demo was bleeding red flags in the back end, and they were beginning to realize their unicorn was built on a foundation of sand. Gregory's first voicemail was exactly what I expected: cold, demanding, and utterly devoid of remorse. Madison, the demo system is throwing a fatal logic error. You need to be back at the estate immediately to provide technical support. If this demo fails tonight and we lose the venture capital interest, you are solely responsible for the liability. Stop being dramatic about your graduation and handle your professional obligations. I listened to the message with a clinical detachment. For years, I had been the one to foot the bill for their mistakes, but now I realized my compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for the last time. Their version of family love was just a high-interest loan I was no longer willing to repay. I did not feel panic. I did not feel the old, familiar urge to fix things. Instead, I opened my laptop and started clicking. This was not a family crisis anymore. It was an audit. I drafted a formal email to the trustee of my grandfather's estate, a man who had known my grandfather and respected the bioengineering degree I had just earned. I requested an immediate freeze on any inheritance assets currently managed by Gregory and Patricia, citing a conflict of interest and potential misappropriation of funds. If they wanted to talk about liability and financial damages, we would do it in a language they understood: legal documentation and forensic accounting. Then I initiated the Zurich Protocol. I sent a confirmation to the award committee, providing the secure account details for the $225,000 research grant. My fingers moved with the lethal precision of someone who had already calculated the outcome. I was no longer a reactive child begging for a scrap of attention. I was a proactive professional liquidating a toxic partnership. By the time I closed my laptop, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the dashboard of my car glowed with a different kind of light, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. Gregory and Patricia were likely on their way to the gala, straightening their silk ties and adjusting their pearl necklaces, unaware that I had already initiated a total system override on their lives. They were not shocked by what they had done to me over the last 4 years. They were about to be shocked that I had stopped playing the role of the silent investor. The subscription to their version of reality had officially expired, and the bill was finally due. I was about to put the car in gear and leave that empty stadium behind when my phone chimed with a notification that was not a call or a text. It was a secure file transfer from a private server. Then the phone rang. This time, I answered. Madison. The voice was sharp, aged, and carried the weight of a woman who had built an empire from nothing. It was my great-aunt Eleanor, the founder of our family's investment firm, and the only person Gregory and Patricia actually feared. "I am here, Eleanor," I said, my voice as level as a horizon line. "I watched the live stream of your graduation," she began, her tone devoid of the fake sweetness my mother used. "You were magnificent, and I noticed the seating chart. I also noticed that your parents were currently posting photos from a unicorn gala for your brother's fraudulent little app." She paused, and I could hear the sound of a physical file being slapped onto a mahogany desk. "I have been doing a deep dive into the corporate accounts, Madison. Something did not balance. I found the discrepancy an hour ago. Check your email." I opened the PDF she had sent. The white light of the screen was blinding in the dark car, a clinical glow that illuminated the end of my parents' reign. It was a copy of my grandfather's trust fund, a fund established when I was 10 years old, intended to finance my bioengineering research and graduate studies. I scrolled through the transactions. 6 months ago, $350,000 had been withdrawn in a single lump sum. The purpose listed seed investment for Jackson Whitney. Then I saw the authorization page. There were 3 signatures required: Gregory's, Patricia's, and mine. I zoomed in on the bottom line. My name was written in a fluid, perfect script, a script that looked exactly like mine, except for the slight hesitation at the curve of the M. "They forged it, did they not?" I asked. My anger was not loud. It was a digital readout of a critical system failure. "They did," Eleanor confirmed. I pulled the original document from the vault. The ink was different. The notary was a friend of your father's who owes him a favor. They did not just neglect you, Madison. They committed asset stripping on your future to prop up their failing investment in Jackson. I stared at the forged signature. This was not just a betrayal of family. It was a criminal breach of contract. I realized then that I had never been a daughter to them. I had been an unsecured loan, a pool of capital they felt entitled to raid whenever their golden child ran out of talent. My grandfather had left that money to me because he saw my brilliance. Gregory and Patricia had taken it because they saw me as a worthless burden who did not need a future as much as Jackson needed a demo. "What are you going to do?" Eleanor asked. "I am going to perform a hostile takeover," I replied. I did not call the police. Not yet. That would be too quick, too merciful. I spent the next hour in that parking lot drafting a different kind of document. I attached the bank statements Eleanor had provided, the forensic comparison of the signatures, and the record of the misappropriated $350,000. I prepared a formal criminal complaint and a civil suit for the total liquidation of the trust, including interest and punitive damages. I did not send it to my parents. I saved it as a draft on my phone, ready to be launched alongside Jackson's app. I looked at my reflection in the dark window of the car. The valedictorian gown was gone, replaced by the cold, methodical clarity of a woman who was no longer a victim. Gregory and Patricia thought they were hosting a celebration of their success. They had no idea I was about to walk into their gala with a kill shot that would bankrupt their reputations and their bank accounts in one single click. This was not a family drama anymore. This was a closing ceremony. I put the car in drive. The Silicon Valley Gala was starting in 2 hours, and I had one last gift to deliver for my brother's big launch. Vengeance is a luxury, but justice is just good accounting. I walked into the grand ballroom of the Silicon Valley estate, and the air smelled like overpriced cologne and high-stakes desperation. 120 VIP investors leaned in, their eyes fixed on the stage where Jackson stood, illuminated by a spotlight he had not earned. He looked exactly like the person Gregory and Patricia had invested $350,000 to create, polished, arrogant, and utterly fraudulent. I stood at the back of the room, still in my thrift store dress, a clinical observer watching a dying ecosystem. Jackson was mid-sentence, his voice booming with the confidence that only exists when you have stolen the foundation of your success. The Unicorn app is not just an algorithm, he bragged, gesturing to the massive digital screen behind him. It is a paradigm shift in bioengineering logic. It is the future I have spent years building from the ground up. I looked down at my phone. The countdown on my kill switch was at 0. I pulled up the folder Great Aunt Eleanor had sent me, the forensic proof of the forged signatures, and the records of the $350,000 embezzled from my grandfather's trust. On stage, Jackson reached his peak. And now, ladies and gentlemen, witness the birth of a new era, because the future is now. He slammed his thumb onto the oversized launch button on his pedestal. I hit enter on my phone. The massive screen behind him did not show the revolutionary demo. It did not show the sleek user interface I had coded during my lab night shifts. It flickered once, then turned a searing clinical red in bold black letters that took up the entire 30-foot display. 2 words appeared: access denied. Below it, in a font that screamed across the ballroom, stolen property. The room went deathly silent. Jackson hit the button again, his face going pale beneath his tan. There is a technical glitch, he stammered, looking toward the wings where Gregory was already frantically gesturing. I did not wait for them to recover. I walked down the center aisle, the sound of my heels on the marble floor, the only noise in the room. As I reached the front table where Patricia sat, draped in pearls and holding a glass of champagne, I pulled a stack of documents from my bag. I did not throw them. I placed them on the table with the lethal precision of a final audit. This is not a glitch, Jackson, I said, my voice carrying through the silent hall without the need for a microphone. It is a repossession. This app is built on biologic. I developed research I published, and $350,000 you stole from my inheritance by forging my signature. A gasp rippled through the crowd of investors. Gregory rushed toward me, his face a mask of pure fury. Madison, shut this down right now! You are destroying everything we have built! No, father, I said, meeting his eyes with a clarity that finally made him flinch. I am just balancing the books. You did not build this. I did. You were just the silent partners who forgot to pay the bill. Patricia stood up, her hand trembling as she looked at the screen, then at the investors who were already starting to stand and reach for their phones. Madison, please, we are your family. We can fix this. Just tell them it is a mistake. I looked at her, at the woman who had called me a worthless burden while she lived off my grandfather's money and my intellectual labor. I saw the red-rimmed eyes of a woman who was not shocked by what she had done, but by the fact that her low-maintenance asset had finally liquidated the contract. I have already fixed the system error for you, mother, I said, my tone cold and final. The error was my presence. I am officially offline. I turned my back on the stage, on the extinction of the unicorn, and on the family that had overdrafted on my soul for 23 years. As I walked toward the exit, my phone buzzed with the confirmation of my $225,000 research grant deposit. My laptop inside my bag glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and a one-way ticket to a life where I was finally the primary investor. I walked out the doors without looking back, leaving the wreckage of their version of success behind me. The view from my new laboratory in Zurich is a study in clinical precision, white peaks, gray sky, and the silent fall of snow against the reinforced glass. Inside, the air smells of ozone and the quiet hum of progress. My research on biologic systems is finally getting the investment it deserves, and for the first time in my life, I am the primary shareholder in my own future. The legal aftermath in Silicon Valley was as predictable as a line of code. Once the unicorn app was exposed as stolen property, the venture capital firms did not just walk away. They initiated a full-scale asset recovery. My parents, Gregory and Patricia, were forced to liquidate their estate to pay back the $350,000 they had embezzled from my trust, plus punitive damages and interest. Their reputation in the investment community is a zero balance sheet. Last I heard, they moved into a 2-bedroom rental in a part of the valley they used to mock, and Jackson is working as a junior sales associate, finally learning the value of labor he cannot outsource to his sister. 6 months after the gala, I received a letter from my mother. It was not an apology. It was a request for a new investment of my time to help rebuild their lives. I did not cry. I did not feel a flicker of the old, learned helplessness. I simply scanned the letter into my liquidated assets folder and hit delete. I realized that my compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for 23 years, and the account is now permanently closed. This was not just about revenge. It was about accounting. I used the first $50,000 of my research award to establish the Eleanor Grant for Independent Innovation. It is a fund specifically for bioengineering students who, like me, have been ridden out of their own family's narrative. I am building a lab for the black sheep, a space where brilliance does not need permission to shine. Looking back at the girl who sat in that parking lot with $35, I realized she was not weak. She was just waiting for the right moment to execute the kill switch on a toxic contract. You cannot wait for people to see your worth. You have to audit your own life and decide who gets access to your resources. Boundaries are not walls. They are the terms of service for your existence. Justice is not always about the fire. Sometimes it is about the quiet, cold peace of knowing your books are balanced and you no longer owe anyone your light. If you have ever felt invisible in your own family, please leave a heart emoji in the comments. You are not alone, and your value is not a line item for someone else to manage. Subscribe to join our community of survivors reclaiming their own stories.